What I wanted to talk to you about today was the survey that I had sent out to everyone asking what topics you all were interested in having me cover, because obviously I want to cover the topics that are most important to you. And so there were a couple of questions, and they boiled down to what of the 9 topics that I listed is the most important one. So that question required you to pick only one topic. The next page was all of those 9 topics, and you could pick whichever one you want. So it was interesting, the comparison between the two, but what I want to focus on is the first question, which was the one you had to pick, the topic that was the most important one to you. Okay, so the results, I think I sent you in the email, were that the top 3 were operations and workflow, profitability, marketing, and focus and productivity. And what was interesting to me were a couple of things. One, how many people took the survey. When I sent it out the first time in the email, I got about 55 people to click on the link and fill out the survey, which I thought was pretty good. And the responses were pretty much the same then in terms of the percentages as they were when I got an additional, 200 and so people to fill out the survey. So it was really surprising to me that with the second email, I got 4 times as many people to respond. Not really sure why. Maybe it was the subject line. Maybe it was me prodding and begging. Who knows? But 250 people took the survey, and these were their top answers. So what people most want me to cover by clear margin is what I would call logistics, operations, workflow. How do you get things done? How do you move work through the pipeline in your law firm? Which makes sense. That's an important thing, right? It's very important. But also important, I think, is the ability to get really good clients, to know that you're going to get a steady stream of the work that you like to do. And that to me was the marketing profitability question. But that was, 13% less people said that they were interested in that as the number one topic, which tells me either folks already know how to do that, they feel comfortable with that, and their biggest struggles are more with the logistics, or maybe it's something else, and they're just not sure that they could make more money, which is what I'm always preaching, is that you can actually make more money, do a better job, get better clients. But I think a lot of people have just reached a belief ceiling where they just say, well, this is what I believe I can get, and that's it, and I don't think I can get any more. So that's perhaps the reason for that answer. Then it was interesting to me that actually more people were interested in focus and productivity than in marketing and profitability by a slight margin, but that was, it edged out marketing and profitability. So that's interesting. People are interested in logistics, operation, and also focus and productivity. So those are the top 3 answers. Now, there was another answer that I was kind of surprised more people didn't pick this. And when you can pick from among all the topics and select as many as you like, this one got a lot more prominence. But here in the you have to pick the one most important thing, this topic here, which is the big picture, only 7% of the people said that this was what they were most interested in. Okay. So I find that interesting because the big picture, I really think, is the thing that leads to everything else. It's the unifying principle. And if you're struggling with any of the other things and you don't have the big picture dialed in, and most of us don't, and there's no shame in that, then it's going to make it harder to do any of those things. If you don't have the big picture dialed in, you may focus more attention on one thing, let's say operations, when your biggest problem is, let's say, focus and productivity, or perhaps even marketing. Now, I think the big picture is always the most important thing, because as I've learned from my mistakes and looked at other people and seen how they become successful, and also read about people who are successful describing how they became successful, those folks are always focused on the big picture. And the more I realized that that's what successful people were, and the more I tried to focus on the big picture in my own growth and my business growth and personal growth, I realized that was really usually my big problem. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, and I want to start with talking to you about somebody that I think has a pretty good track record of success in the financial world, and that is Warren Buffett. I'm sure everyone here knows that he's one of the most wealthy people in the world. He started a company called Berkshire Hathaway, which is very successful. His partner is a lawyer named Charlie Munger, who was from Omaha, Nebraska. They were, I guess, childhood buddies. And Charlie Munger is also a very successful person. Both of those folks I pay a lot of attention to. Now, what's interesting is if you pay attention to people that are successful, they'll tell you how they became successful. I mean, they're not trying to hide it. And I think a lot of times people don't believe that the magic sauce is really what they say it is, but I can tell you, I've come to realize it is. This is, the magic sauce is hidden in plain sight. People will tell you what it is. So Warren Buffett credits, several different things, but one of the books one of the things he credits was the course, the Dale Carnegie course. He went through the Dale Carnegie course and talked about how this was very instrumental in him learning how to relate to people better, to do a lot of things that set him up for success in life. So very early in his career, when he wasn't super successful, he attended a Dale Carnegie seminar, and he credits that with his success. And of course, the Dale Carnegie seminars are really just kind of extended versions of what Dale Carnegie put in the famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a huge bestseller. If you go to Amazon and look at how many people have bought this book and how many 5-star reviews it has, it's off the charts. Okay, so now what's interesting is to see the other people besides Warren Buffett who credit Dale Carnegie with their success. Other successful people. So, for example, Lee Iacocca, the CEO, the former CEO and president of Chrysler Motor Cars, he credits Dale Carnegie, the book or the course, with his success. Scott Adams, the creator of the cartoon Dilbert, in one of his books, talked about how taking the Dale Carnegie course changed his life. In the book that he wrote this about was called How to Fail and Still Succeed, or something like How to Fail Big and Still Succeed, which was his effort to describe how he had become successful and say, look, these are the principles that I used. These are the strategies I use. So in the book, he explains, he credits the Carnegie course as being a huge influence, and he recommends it to other people. Dr. Sanjay Gupta who's a doctor, he appears on CNN as their medical expert. He also credits it. Chuck Norris, the actor, martial artist, and former member of the United States Air Force. Rosalind Carter, former First Lady, married to Jimmy Carter. Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics. Johnny Cash, the singer and songwriter. That one shocked me. Orville Redenbacher, who's a businessman from a small town who started a fertilizer business and then later transitioned into the popcorn business and created gourmet popcorn that he's famous for. And then, of course, the last person is Damon John, who founded an apparel company called FUBU, but he's mostly known these days for being one of the regular judges on the TV show Shark Tank. He invests in companies, and he's written several books. Now, so Damon John is somebody that I saw speak recently at a conference that I went to in San Diego. He was one of the prominent, end of the day speakers at this conference for business people who are trying to learn how to do business online. And he was asked, the same old questions, like, how did you succeed? And one of the things he mentioned was the Dale Carnegie course. And he said that's one of the things. But the other thing, which he didn't mention in that interview, was a book called Think and Grow Rich, which actually preceded, I believe, the Dale Carnegie book in terms of, it was one of the original self-help success type books. And this is another one of those books that if you go to Amazon and look at the the 5-star ratings, you'll see they're off the charts. The number of people who claim that this book changed their life is, many people. And Damon John is one of those people. So who else besides Damon John credits Think and Grow Rich with making them successful? Oprah Winfrey, which I'm sure most of you know. Mitt Romney, that one kind of surprised me, businessman, politician. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle. Bruce Lee, the martial artist. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Andrew Tan, which most people aren't going to know, but he's a Chinese billionaire. So the point is, even people outside the U.S., even people in other countries, because this book has been translated into many different languages. LL Cool J, the rapper, credits this book. Dan Kennedy, whom most of you have heard me talk about. He's a very serious-minded, sober businessman, not the kind of person who's going to go after frou-frou stuff. And I know that he credits this book because as I started reading more of Dan Kennedy's articles, he credits Think and Grow Rich all the time. He credits it as a central feature in terms of influence, in terms of strategies he employs on a regular basis, even today. And of course, Damon John, we talked about. Now, Damon John mentions it in this book called Rise and Grind, which somebody sent me a copy of out of the blue. I think it was the folks from Belay because he was working with them, and so they sent it to me. And I flipped it open. I said, okay, well, let me read the book. I'd heard of him in Shark Tank, and I just flipped through it quickly. And when I got to page 3, I saw this text here where he talked about the reason for this book was he wanted to help people understand how he had become successful and the key things, in helping him become successful. So he said he's going to break down some of the rituals of the world's most successful people from all walks of life, which he does in the book. And he says the idea is that by pulling back the curtain and showing how these folks live and work, I can highlight some takeaways for readers who are looking to change things up. In other words, to become more successful. So on the next page, he says, one of the things, he's hoping you'll do is get some kind of primary strategy for doing something that transforms your life. And that's how it happened for him. He says the third or fourth time he read Napoleon Hill's great book. And that caught my attention. He didn't just read the book. He read it 3 or 4 times. Now, at the interview that I saw him speak at, I think he mentioned the first time he read the book was when he was 17. So he was somebody who was trying to figure out how to be successful in life. But even later, after he started to become successful, he kept going back to read this book. So I think my point is the big picture is the thing I think most people should be focused on. Now, I understand maybe you're thinking, well, you already have this covered. Maybe I'm not the person that you want to tell you about the big picture, and that's fine. But I'm just telling you where I got these big picture things that have changed my thinking and helped me progress dramatically better. This quote I saw recently, it's not attributed to any particular person, but it's an interesting quote because it's true. The quote is, most people spend more time planning their summer vacation than they do planning their lives. And I'm not really sure why that's true. I think we don't, teach goal setting. We don't talk about it. We think it's some weird thing. And yet it's kind of strange that all these people that are successful do it very thoughtfully and intentionally, and then credit that process as the key to them being successful. So, my question for you is what are your most important goals for your personal life and for your business? And if you know what those goals are, then you can work down and start plugging in, okay, my strategy for doing, this thing is this, my priorities are this, I know I need to focus on this. But if you don't have your most important goals identified and you're not really clear about them, then it's going to be very hard for you to succeed. And I think every one of those folks that I listed, as having read both of those books would tell you that that's true. And yet that's not what most people do. So I know that it's kind of agonizing, and a lot of people think, oh, I got to think about my goals and it's just so hard. How would I even begin to do this? And that just seems like such a big, hairy mess. Okay, well, it could be if you're not clear about it, but let me give you a simple way to do this. And this is the way that I did it, which I did upon recommendation of somebody who I believe, had done it because they said they had, and I knew, from their enthusiasm and passion and the way they described it, this is what they did. And I thought, well, maybe I should try this. So the question that was set up that I followed was presented this way. If there were no limitations or consequences, what would your perfect average day look like? Now, sometimes I've heard people say, what would your perfect day look like? But the most important word in here is average, because you're not trying to say, oh, the perfect day would be, when my team wins the Super Bowl, I meet the person I care the most about, my kids, are born, not that kind of thing, but rather your average day, right? Every day you get up and, typically you do these things. What would your life look like if you could do those kinds of things as your average day? And I would say that 99 point, 999 however percent of the people in the world would answer this question in a way that's vastly different than their actual average day. Well, there you go. That's like your clue that maybe you should think about how can I set up my goals so that my perfect average day becomes a realization. Now, when the person I heard describing this talked about it, and it was on a YouTube discussion, and it doesn't matter who it was. Um, but I said, well, that's interesting. This person credits that. I'm going to go, and it was some business person who followed Dan Kennedy, who's part of the Dan Kennedy world. And what's interesting is when I started doing the research, all these people are crediting the same things. Now, when I heard this, I thought, I've heard a few people talk about this perfect day thing, but I hadn't really found where this exercise was. And this fellow said, yeah, there was some workbook. He found it on the internet. So I Google and I couldn't find it easily, but eventually I found what I know for sure is what this person found. And it's not an easy thing to find. There are other variations of it. And then I've been in mastermind groups where other people have talked about it, suggested folks do it. And when they do it, amazingly, they go, oh my God, that was the most amazing thing in the world. So here's the deal. It's going to take, and this is what the person said, it's going to take you a couple of hours at least, and possibly a couple of days, different days, because you might not be able to get it all done in one day, or you might want to think about it, come back to it. So it's something you should try to knock out, in one day if possible, just so you dedicate yourself to it. If it takes 2 days or whatever, fine, but you want to finish this. You really want to go through this process. And I was kind of astonished thinking I could knock this out, in an hour. It's not going to be a big deal. But then I realized once you start thinking about these things, because you've spent most of your time planning summer vacations and not planning your life, these questions are really powerful and they're moving and you really want to grapple with them. And so it took me a couple of hours and I filled it all out. And, when I filled it out, I remember thinking, that's, no consequences, no limitations. Okay, I'm going to shoot for the moon. This is what I really want. Let's see what works. And I put it down, and guess what? I am pretty much, I'd say I'm within 5 to 10% of my perfect average day looking like what I wanted it to look like when I wrote down those goals. So, how did I do this? Well, there's this thing called a simple system to achieve your goals. This is what I found, Googling around the internet. It's written by a guy named Paul Myers, who is a business strategist of the kind, like Dan Kennedy and other people. He's, I think, a copywriter. He's pretty tech savvy. He's got a site called talkbiz.com or something like that. So he has this PDF. I downloaded it, and it's free. Okay. Now he calls it beerware because he says if you read it, if you use it, he'd appreciate you sending him $5 to buy him a beer. And I've bought him, more than a couple of beers, because it really helped me a lot. I've even gotten to know him. He's on Facebook. He's a nice guy. And I say know him, and we've traded emails is, the best we've done, but he's a busy guy. I'm sure he gets a lot of emails from a lot of people. So, I don't like to, make him feel like I'm a stalker, but it helped me out a lot. So I'm going to put this workbook in the Facebook group. It's a PDF, he says, distribute it freely as long as, the people who read it, it's always, charge for it as long as you attribute it and as long as, the people can see it's beerware and so forth. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it in the Facebook Law Firm Autopilot group in a second, and then I will take your questions. But I want to say one other thing about this. I am about to leave tomorrow to go for a retreat. I'll just call it a retreat, where this is the kind of thing we're going to be doing. So the point of that is it's going to be 3 days. It doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't matter who it is because I don't want to get into that. What I want to focus on is you can do this from home with a workbook. Okay. I'm going to take this workbook with me and I'm going to do it again at this retreat that we're going to because I want to update it and I want to see how it compares to what I wrote earlier. But the point is, once you realize that there's power in doing this, you're going to keep doing it because it affects everything else that you do. So I'm definitely going to, talk about operations and workflow, in upcoming webinars and presentations because I know that's what you're interested in. But I wanted you to understand I still think it's important to focus on the big picture, and we are going to focus on that from time to time. But I think that if I give you this workbook, and I think for those of you that go through it, you'll find it very interesting. It begins with about 30 pages of him explaining how this works and why it works. And he's a very good writer. He's very entertaining. You'll enjoy that part. But the best part is the 30 pages that you should then print out and work on them by hand, because that's really the best way to do it. And just fill it out and then see what it reveals to you. And I plan to come back for those of you that have done this, and we can share our thoughts about this, about how impactful it was. Did it make a difference? Did it, spark some insight? Because I know it will, for those of you that do it. And let's talk about it, because I think if we do, it'll help some other folks who are kind of sitting on the fence realize that this is actually the most powerful thing you can do. So yes, remember that, most of us spend more time planning our summer vacations than we do planning our important goals. Here's a chance to do the thing that really matters. And it's Paul Meyer's gift to you through me. All right, so now I'm going to end that presentation, skip out of that, and go back to just me live, and we can talk about some questions. All right, what kind of questions do we have? Albert Gordon. What AV equipment am I using to do Facebook Live? I am using a Rode Podcaster mic, this thing here, on a boom that I bought. Both of these things I bought from Amazon. Then I'm using my laptop, and I'm using software for Mac only called Ecamm Live. It's spelled ECAMM Live, Ecamm. It's $39, one-time fee. It's pretty cool. You can do all kinds of things like share your screen, hang on a second. You can put lower thirds in there. And actually what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and post into the Law Firm Autopilot group the PDF that I was talking about. So that will pop in there just right now. And so that's the tool I use, Ecamm Live. You can use your phone. I think I talked in a prior Facebook Live session about how Facebook is going to be promoting and ranking higher live streams. YouTube is going to do the same thing. That's one of the things I learned at these two business conferences that I went to in San Diego a couple of weeks ago. So it's my goal to start doing more of these because, first of all, it's really easy. With Ecamm Live, it's going to record this video to my hard drive. It's also going to push it up to Facebook. I think I might even be able to send it simultaneously to YouTube, but I'd rather edit it first before I put it up on YouTube. So that's the software I use. And let me see if there's any other questions. Let's see. So I'm trying to see if I can see. So one thing I haven't been able to figure out is how do I see when people are commenting? Oh, I bet you this. Yep, here we go. All right, so let's see. Actually, let me drag this up. Look at. Some people are getting frozen slides and a frozen window. That's probably because your internet connection where you were was not working because nobody else was complaining about that, which means it was working okay on my end. Okay, Charles, you said you finally got it. Still no luck on the iPad. Aaron asks, will I be writing any more books? Yes, actually I am writing. So I had in mind to write a book about the overview of how do you do law firm autopilot, like how do you use technology to create operational efficiency and also to get better clients and so forth. Because after talking to a lot of people and thinking about this a lot, and I intended to start the book earlier, but as I get more feedback, it kind of reframes my thinking. And so that book, I've kind of thought, maybe I'm going to put that aside, or maybe I'll work on it simultaneously with my podcast. So I have two books in mind. One is that one, And the idea is, how do you get better clients? How do you create the kind of practice that you like a lot? Because I am finding, and this doesn't surprise me because this was true for me, and it's true for almost everyone I talk to. If you talk to them long enough, this turns out to be something that people will tell you, you know, sometimes sheepishly, sometimes straight up, but or sometimes they have to figure it out that, if there were no restrictions and no consequences and they could have the perfect practice that they wanted, a lot of folks would have a much different practice because let's say a lot of people who do litigation don't like the disruption and agony that a litigation practice has. And they'd say, oh, well, I'd rather do, let's say, estate planning or business strategy consulting. And they'd rather do that because that would let them live the kind of life that they want. So I think the most important thing is not necessarily the operations. That's important, but, before you have the operations to work on, maybe a lot of the operations you have would be simpler if the kind of practice you have were simpler. And I think a lot of people want that. Some people don't. Some people like doing litigation. Some people like doing multiple different kinds of practice areas, which, makes your operations harder, it makes your marketing harder. So, but I want to make sure that I'm talking to lawyers and helping them understand that you really can have some things that you don't think you can have, because that was the big shocker for me. I was in a big firm. I thought I didn't know how to market. I didn't know anything about a lot of things, including running a practice. So I just thought, well, I'm unhappy here, but this is the only place I can be. So I'll just stay here and keep doing this, even though it makes me unhappy. Then I realized, purely by accident, because I started a blog and then I started connecting with people who understood how to use technology. And I started learning that technology could help me solve a lot of the problems with operations, and not needing to hire people to work for me because I don't like managing people, at least not full-time employees that are just sitting there waiting for me to give them work or tell them what to do. So when I realized that I could do it differently and could have my own practice, I started going down that path and realizing there were a lot more options open to me than I imagined. And so I think it's important to have that conversation, because there's no use solving, a small problem that's not really the big problem, when if you solve the big problem, a lot of the little problems would go away. So I'm big on that. Um, and of course, I'll talk to people about operations and how to be paperless and all that other good stuff. So, that is kind of where I'm thinking, about a book, but I, have an idea for a book more targeted on, how lawyers can be trusted, what goes into being trusted, because if you know how trust is established and built up, that's the key component in getting the right kind of clients you want. So I'm playing with those two book ideas. We'll see. All right. So Jim says, as a refresher, are there any sections in the course about scaling up your practice? In other words, hiring, growing your practice, balancing hiring needs with cash flow and so forth. There are not any lessons in the course about that, because I think that's the kind of thing that is best handled in coaching calls like this, or I'm calling this a coaching call, Facebook Live. So if we got several lawyers together who have this problem, we talked about it, we would find that there's some commonalities. Now, I'll tell you who talks about this a lot, and I always highly recommend people that are doing things similar to me. But it's Lee Rosen. So Lee Rosen talks about this a lot because he went through this problem. See, I did not have this problem because I didn't have employees. Lee Rosen had this problem, the problem of having employees, figuring out how to hire them, figuring out how to train them. He talks about that in his program. I know that Arjan Robbins talks about this, or that's covered in his program, but Arjan, I'm not a big fan of. He charges a lot of money. The people around him do a good job, but I think a lot of the money goes to Arjan's lavish lifestyle, and he just rubs me the wrong way, so I don't recommend Arjan. But there are people in the group who use Arjan and find him successful because his coaches talk about this kind of stuff, like how do you hire people and how do you scale up. Now, in our group, I know there's several people, and there's a Slack discussion that's been taking place about this, but Andrew LeGrand has had this problem. Parker Larison has had this problem. Keith Magnus has had this problem. Keith is not very active in the Slack group, but there's some other folks who are. And I think a conversation among you all is the best way to get a sense of this and talk about it. There are strategies and tactics. Lee Rosen talks about them. Arjan talks about them. The strategies are pretty similar because it's not really that, it's not some secret sauce thing. Pretty, it's pretty basic strategic stuff, and I could share my thoughts about what those are because I've listened to those conversations. But I think the best thing to do is have that conversation with other lawyers who have this problem because the insight that you get is just going to be better. And plus, you can ask questions, and it's not just, Ernie, he doesn't like to have employees telling you his theories. So that would be my best advice there. All right. So Richard says, if you're 60, which I almost am, is it too late to apply the simple systems to achieve your goals? And the answer is no. It's never too late. There's that old saying, the best time, it's a Chinese proverb, the best time to have planted a tree was, 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. So, yeah, you could say the best time to have done this was when you were 20 or 30 or 40, but those times have passed, and let's not live in the past. We're here now. The second best time is now. And yes, you can, because you could, live for another 10 or 20 years. And what do you want to do? Work on the wrong thing because you say, it's too late. I can't really do that anymore. Or work on the right thing. And if it gives you insight, great. If it doesn't give you insight or confirms where you already are, great. But if you have no idea, that's a bad thing. So, my theory is clarity is something you should always want. There's never a reason why you wouldn't want clarity. Um, and so I'll give you kind of an offbeat example about this because this just popped in my head and I have offbeat thoughts. But I'm a musician. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a musician. Nobody in my family was a musician. When I say I'm a musician, it means I play music. I didn't want to sit down at the piano and learn how to play by reading music, but that's what I was told I had to do. Until I discovered there were people who learned to play by ear and that this was actually something anyone could do. And when I learned to play by ear, I just kind of fumbled around and, figured out songs. That's what my friends did. And I didn't think there was a system for figuring out how to play by ear. I just knew that there were people who could do it. And I said, okay, I'll do that too. And it took me a really long time to, for my ear to get good enough and for my fumbling around to figure out that, how to do this. Now, I've learned that there are people who can play sophisticated jazz who never studied, they just learned. And if you ask them to explain how they do it, they couldn't tell you. They just do stuff. But a trained musician would know, okay, well, what they're doing here is they're changing, or they realize that the key has changed and they're doing the 2-5-1 progression. When you start learning music theory, you realize that there is a system underlying how music is created. And if you study photography, there's a system underlying how great photographs are made. If you study anything, there's a system underlying it, right? And so a lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to know the system because it'll ruin my way of looking at things. Or, I'm a brilliant comedian and I just make things up and, my comedy works. I don't want to analyze the comedy because if I analyze it, that'll ruin it and I won't be able to do it well. Well, that's a fear and I understand it, but it's not true. Everything is better if you have clarity about how it's done. There's no exception to this rule. So the worst thing that could happen if you look at this and say, well, can I apply these principles? Is you go, well, I see that I should maybe be doing things differently. Okay, great. You don't have to do them differently if you don't want to. But if you don't know that you secretly want, this kind of life, then you're not going to be able to move towards it with any kind of intentionality, strategy, or, clarity. So it's always better to know what you want and how to get it than to not know it all and just say, well, I'm too old, I'll never get it. Because that's just a fear, right? That's all that is. And the more you study this kind of stuff, and I've studied it a lot because, I say studied, I've read about it. And again, everybody tells you that this is true for them. When everybody tells you, and I mean everyone who's in any way thoughtful, I'm pretty sure I know there are people who wouldn't say this, and, I can think of one shining example right now, which I'm not going to get into. But if you understand how your mind works, you understand that we tend to have these fears. why, biologists or, social biologists will tell us, it's because the amygdala and the fight or flight response. And that now we live in a safe environment, but we still, the amygdala is still working overtime. And so we have all these fears that are kind of irrational. If you just write them down, they start to seem irrational when you write them down. But that's one of those fears. Oh, it's too much trouble. Oh, it's not going to be worth it. Oh, I'll find out I'm not going to get what I want. I understand those fears because I had them. It wasn't theoretical for me. I had those same fears. I totally understand it. When I sat down to write out these goals, it was after, my marriage had like cratered. I was unhappy. I was in a fog of unhappiness, but I was still trying to work on this business. And I thought, well, Dan Kennedy, these other people say that this brought them clarity. Let me just give this a shot. Well, of all the things that I gave a shot, to, this kind of thing was the most powerful thing. This brought me clarity. This made it, apparent to me what I really wanted from life. And believe me, when I looked at the list, I said, well, I don't see that happening anytime soon, but at least I know what it is I dream of having. I wouldn't even allow myself to say that I aspired to have or that I was going to work on because I was like, that's kind of ridiculous. So I understand, totally understand, but I'm telling you, it's never too late. So I hope I, have answered your question and made you feel better about that. Anyone else has any questions that they want me to address? I'm happy to address them. But it's looking like maybe we've hit the mark. Nobody else has any other questions. All right. Well, then with that, I will wrap this up as soon as I can find my Ecamm Live finish button. I see there's still a few folks here. So thank you all very much for attending. I'm going to post this to YouTube after I trim it off a little bit and make it available to other folks who aren't in the law firm Autopilot Facebook group. But you guys were, obviously, so thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time, everyone. Take care. This video originally aired as a Facebook Live event in the private group called Law Firm Autopilot. This group is for solo and small firm attorneys who want to take their practice to the next level, and you can join for free if you just search Facebook using the phrase Law Firm Autopilot. Application is open to all attorneys who are in solo and small firm practices. So just go ahead and search, find it, apply, and you should be good. All right, hope to see you in there soon. Take care.